Okay, let's get started.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Caroline Hoy. Let me turn my video on here. And I'd like to welcome you today. I'm Caroline with WellSaid Labs, and I'm so excited to have you here to talk with Zack Zalon, the CEO of Super Hi-Fi, about how we can create more immersive experiences with our companies. And I'm going to let Zack tell you a little bit more about Super Hi-Fi here in just a moment. But if this is your first exposure to WellSaid Labs, we are the best quality AI voice avatar on the market, which you can use in a studio subscription, in an API, or even in a custom voice. So take a look at that at wellsaidlabs.com. And Zack, welcome to the webinar. So happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Great. Let's see my slideshow. Let me get that going. What we're going to talk about today is a little bit more about Super Hi-Fi and how they got into business and the differentiation of experiences. And like I said, Zack can talk about that much better than I can. He's going to discuss with us a bit about what that differentiation means, examples of some brands who do it really well, and then exploring kind of what that stands for in terms of your brand. And then we're going to finish out with some concrete steps about how you can translate these objectives into action. We do have a Q&A time here at the end, so please do enter your questions in the Q&A area as we go, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. And also, if you didn't hear our voice avatar announcement, we are going to send a recording of this tomorrow. So if you'd like to share this conversation with anyone on your team, or you need to duck out early, don't worry, you're not going to miss a thing. All right, so Zack, tell us a little bit about Super Hi-Fi and how you got into the experience differentiation business.
I will. Just to kind of set it up, I am going to talk about synthetic voice specifically and why we think it's actually so important for differentiation, at least in the area that we work in. But I'd like to start first by talking about why we do what we do, who we are, and how we even got here, because I think it does matter. It will hopefully connect the dots for people. And by the way, I do have the chat open as well, so at some point, if people want to chat in some questions, I'm super happy to start taking them. But basically, this is what it comes down to. So Super Hi-Fi, we have a mission. Our mission is to transform the way that the world listens to music. We do that by using extremely powerful artificial intelligence tools to help to improve music listening experiences for consumers, to drive a lot of efficiency for our direct customers, and to offer them an innovation toolbox that helps them to do things that are really hard for them to do right now. Just given the fact that there hasn't actually been a tremendous amount of innovation on the back end side of the music experience landscape. But the reason we got into this wasn't actually to build technology. Technology is a means to an end for us. So the reason that we got into this was actually to drive differentiation. We've been, just by way of for kind of an example of our history. So my business partner and I have been working together for almost 22 years. We met at a kind of short-lived internet online record label venture started by Jimmy Iovine called farmclub.com in the late 1990s. But we actually very quickly moved on and started a digital music platform group for Richard Branson called Virgin Digital. And for about 7 years, we ran the digital entertainment assets, the digital music entertainment assets of the Virgin Group globally. I mean, that was an incredible experience, partly because we got to do a lot of really cool things and because Richard Branson is wild and risk-taking, partly because we got to understand what it meant to be part of a brand like Virgin, which neither my partner or I had ever really experienced before. And that was really important. I'll tell you why in a minute. When Virgin was shutting down the Virgin Megastores, which was their global retail group for CDs and games, et cetera, we kind of saw the writing on the wall that maybe the digital music side wasn't going to be around forever. We kind of handed back the keys and set up our own shop to develop for other people, kind of the way that we had been developing for Branson for those years. And we ended up building a lot of online music experiences. So we were the team that built the global CBS radio platform, very early kind of innovative radio platform. We built AOL Radio and Yahoo Launchcast back when those were brands that really mattered. I think one of the projects we're proudest of building was something called Move Music, which was one of the first handset-based, like mobile-based subscription music services for a company called Cricket Wireless. We're proud of it because we were actually serving low-income consumers who didn't really have access to a computer or a credit card, but who wanted access to high-quality music listening experiences. That was actually a very successful product as well in the marketplace. So we have a lot of experience building digital music experiences. That's our passion. We also, because like any company you want to grow, you're going to take the jobs that come to you. And we ended up getting a pretty big reputation in digital transformation generally. Ended up building a whole bunch of projects, big global projects for Fortune 500s. We built the global diabetes platform management app for Johnson & Johnson. We built all of National Geographic's global applications. We built sports platforms for Madison Square Garden and the Knicks and the Rangers. We built Citibank's kind of future innovation apps, Experian, lots of other financial services companies. We just ended up doing a lot. And one of the things we really started to understand working for these companies is that big brands have a very unique relationship with their customers. At some point, we had been offered a book called Love Marks. Carolyn, I don't know if you've heard of that book before. Love Marks was written by a guy named Kevin Roberts, who was the CEO at a very big brand agency called Saatchi & Saatchi, super well respected. Our vice chairman at the time for our agency had been the global CEO of Saatchi & Saatchi. And, you know, strongly suggested we read all the literature about the Love Marks and really start to understand what it means, because even though we weren't a branding agency, we were a digital product agency, he felt like we would benefit from kind of understanding what makes a great brand great.
Yeah.
I think Love Marks was probably the most influential book in some respects that I've ever read, because it really kind of enlightened us to how some brands end up having a relationship with their customers that kind of goes beyond reason, where people are loyal to these brands for reasons that don't really make sense. And yet when you dig deep inside, there's actually a science behind it. So I'll give you a couple of examples. You know, we all think of Apple as this unbelievable brand, and obviously they create incredible products, but you know, Apple almost died in the 1990s. The product suite was terrible. They were very poorly operated, and yet they had enough loyalty that people can continue to buy their products just out of a love for the brand, and allowed them ultimately to have enough time and runway to succeed. Harley Davidson is like, you know, people tattoo Harley Davidson logos on their arms. That's not reasonable, but it gets done. And even if you think about it as a motorcycle, it's not actually all that sophisticated a bike. I don't know if any of you guys who are watching ride motorcycles. Harley Davidson is significantly heavier than most motorcycles. They're generally not air cooled, and so they run a lot hotter. They're not nearly as comfortable in some respects. They vibrate a lot more. They're not known for handling. They're not known for speed. And they're certainly not the least expensive, and they're not the most efficient, fuel efficient or otherwise. So what would happen to Harley Davidson if they decided to kind of listen to the metrics that I just described and make a motorcycle that fit the other characteristics that other motorcycle manufacturers compete on? What if they were able to take their bikes from being 900 pounds to being 600 pounds by taking it from steel to aluminum, adding carbon fiber and other lightning technologies? What if they water cooled their motors so that they ran smoother and quieter, and they were more fuel efficient, and they didn't give off nearly as much heat, so it's not uncomfortable to ride, and they could be smaller with more horsepower and torque with less weight? You know, what if they changed the center of gravity to raise it so that it actually tipped over faster, so that it would be easier to handle in big curves and had a higher lean angle? Those would all be great. They'd be more fuel efficient, more comfortable to ride, they would be better handling, they'd be lighter and easier to maneuver, but they wouldn't be a Harley Davidson. And the reality is that at that point, they wouldn't really stand for anything, and they wouldn't really be different. And that's actually the primary point, is that to build these brands that drive incredible amounts of loyalty beyond reason, you have to be different. And you have to really stand for something. And that recognition was something that started to thread its way through all of our decision-making and all of our comprehension of what made the brands we were working for great. That Harley Davidson example works across a landscape of other companies, any type of product that you can imagine, whether it's a Starbucks, Tesla. Tesla is an incredible vehicle in so many ways, but there's so many problems with Tesla vehicles, right? I mean, there's panel gap issues, reliability issues. The software is never as advanced as Elon Musk promises it's going to be. He charges for automated self-driving up to $12,000 and has been promising it for 5 years. It still doesn't exist. Why? Why are his customers so incredibly loyal, and why does he continue to grow? And it's because they've created a really incredible brand that speaks to something other than just economical vehicular transportation. It's so much more than that. And that's a really important point. That science of making sure that you're different and that you actually stand for something is pretty important when it comes to creating these really powerful connections with consumers. Okay. And there are so many examples of that. I mean, ridiculous numbers of examples. Cheerios, I'll just use the final one. Cheerios is a great example. If you go to a Whole Foods store, there's this massive aisle of cereals, and these cereals are all like, Odeos and like Healthios and Organicos, and it's everything like super kind of high end. There's nothing really commercial on there, but in the middle, there's always a Cheerios box. Why? It's because Cheerios are really the first food that something like 70 or 80% of parents actually feed, hard food that 70 to 80% of new parents feed to their kids. And what Whole Foods found is that if they didn't choose Cheerios, then new moms would actually shop at other supermarkets because their loyalty to Cheerios was bigger than their loyalty to Whole Foods. And so that's why you find Cheerios on a Whole Foods cereal shelf, surrounded by all these cereals that none of us have ever heard of before, and most of us would never eat. And so it's like you can create these relationships, but you have to have something different. You have to stand for something to do it. So back. I'm sorry, Caroline, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just saying it's interesting, the Harley Davidson example that you used, if they suddenly tried to stand for ecology or something else, they would lose that core group who, sees them as that thing.
They would lose what they stand for, and they would lose their differentiation. And those are the two components that you need in order to really create these really emotional relationships. Well, so while we were building all these projects, the reality is that we love digital music for whatever reason. That's our passion. We don't love nature pictures or sports applications or financial services or diabetes. We got pretty good at it, but that's not our passion. And we wanted to focus more on the music space. We wanted to get back more to what we really love and the reason we started working together in the first place. When we looked around the landscape, given everything that we had learned over the 15 years or so of running our own agency, was like, in the music space, in the digital music space, what makes any of them different from one another, and what the hell do any of them stand for? We saw like an example. You look at Spotify, excellent application, but look at Apple Music too, also really, really incredible. Go listen to any one of them and close your eyes and tell me which one you're listening to. If you're not looking at the application, you're not able to hear what you're actually paying for. And what we found is that the space between the songs, right, these giant gaps of silence that all the services were broadcasting, were a green field of opportunity for branding, communication, for storytelling, and for connection. You can't, if you're going to play a Taylor Swift song, it's going to be the same whether it's on Apple, Spotify, Deezer, Pandora, broadcast radio. It doesn't really matter. It's the thing that happens after the song that gives you an opportunity to start to actually stand for something, to have your narrative of who you are as a brand, and to be able to populate that area with content that's compelling enough for consumers that you could start standing for something. You can't please everybody that way. It's hard to be a generic service that way. And I realize that there's a very big attraction for being generic. But just like in the motorcycle example, the generic motorcycle manufacturers have come and gone, hundreds of them, maybe thousands of brands. And Harley Davidson, whether they're doing well, exceptionally well, or not so well, they're still Harley. They are likely to be a motorcycle brand for the remainder of this generation and a few that follow because of the fact that they stand for something so unique. And we thought that the music services could do with some of that. And that's actually why we started Super Hi-Fi. We started Super Hi-Fi with a goal of helping those companies to populate the space between the songs with branding, storytelling, identification, information that allowed them to become something different than each other. And that's why we actually ended up building what we built. It was not really to have a technology. It was really in service of helping to create differentiated experiences that drove that loyalty beyond reason. So that, so that if somebody else lowers a price, you're not just jumping over there because it's the same exact service with a lower price. You're staying loyal to the service that you pay for every month because they give you something more than just the music that's available to everybody else. They give you an experience that's uniquely connected to what your emotional drivers are. And if you can get that connection with a consumer, you win. That's why we started the company.
So that differentiation is about creating an experience for the individual that is better than an experience that a competitor creates.
Yeah, all right. Here's a great example. And it's kind of an obvious and logical example. So broadcast radio. Broadcast radio is an old-fashioned technology. It's still actually really, really popular and actually pretty profitable, but it's pretty old. Thing is, though, there are some things that they do that are kind of timeless. They have the same problems as digital music services. They all have the same content selection, right? The playlists are effectively the same. They have the same technology limitations. It's really limited to your car. It's like they're all marketing to the same consumer, which is somebody who's driving to or from work. But in any major market, you always have two radio stations that are playing the exact same playlist, like two country stations or two CHR stations, right? Two alternative rock stations. Their playlists are exactly the same, but invariably one of them is doing twice the revenue or twice the cumulative listening as the other station. We have to ask, why is that, right? They're playing the same songs. If you look at the 40 top songs that they play, they're exactly the same. Basically, they're just rearranged. So it can't be the music itself. It has to be what you just talked about. It has to do with being unique and creating your own identity, your own content, your own production. Maybe it's the way you interview artists, the way you thread in or layer a news or weather segment, or the way your DJs talk to the audience in a way that makes them feel more connected to the experience than your competitors. That was kind of a fascinating learning for us as well. It's like radio has the same limits that all the digital music companies have. And yet they've been able to carve out uniqueness for themselves by focusing on things that they do differently or better than anybody else that's doing the same thing, basically on the same radio dial. We think digital music services can learn exactly the same lesson. We think that there's an opportunity for them to use that space between the songs to populate better listening experiences and to carve out for themselves a unique space that connects with consumers in a very emotional way. Yeah.
And so what is it that we're trying to achieve with that differentiation? Is it purely brand loyalty, or is there a feeling we want to elicit, an action we want someone to take, a combination of all of that maybe?
I mean, I'll talk about it more broadly, just brands in general. I think there's a mistake people make when they think of brand. They say the word brand, they think logo or name, and that's actually not it. A logo is a logo, and a name is a name. A brand is the feeling that you evoke in your customers when they think of your company. That's actually what your brand is. So it's like when you talk about your brand marketing, I think people get really confused about, is it a message that you send out there? Maybe, but if it's not in service of actually supporting that feeling that you're looking to evoke or that you already do evoke, then it's wasted time and it's wasted money. There's an incredible video that I saw some number of years ago that does a better job of explaining it than I've ever seen. It was Steve Jobs when he first came back to Apple. And he was talking to what seems like a small group. I don't know, it's on YouTube. It's pretty poor quality, but it's pretty incredible content. Basically, what he's talking about is that Apple shouldn't market their products. Their products are incredible and they're amazing, but that's not really what they should be marketing. What they need to learn how to market are their values. And if people understand their values deeply enough, then they'll be able to connect those values back to the products that they're going to learn about through other channels anyway. And what he had come up with at the time was this idea that the values of Apple are all about supporting people who are going to or trying to change the world. Yes, they make computers, but they don't just make computers because they like hardware. IBM back then made them, Dell, Gateway, all these other companies that they were competing with at the time. The reason Apple made computers was to make it easier for people who wanted to change the world. It gave them the ability to actually do that. And so their whole branding campaign was think different. And if you remember it, I don't know if you do, but it's worth watching again. It says something, it's like Richard Dreyfuss's voice, and it's like, something about, because those that try to change the world are often the ones that do. And so that was the whole campaign, was to create a connection between an Apple consumer and the values that they wanted to infuse every aspect of their products. That's a brand. The brand is think different. The brand is change the world. That's the feeling that they wanted to evoke. Whenever you saw an ad, whenever you walked into a store, whenever you bought a product, whenever you used their operating system, every decision then can get made around the mechanics of how you understand your own brand. How do I want to change my operating system so that it's more impactful for those that want to change the world? How do I make it easier to use? How do I remove features that are unnecessary for those that are world changers? Those decisions end up then helping to create products and experiences that don't just leverage the brand, but live up to it. That's the whole point of brand. Brand is understanding the feelings you evoke and then putting everything that you do, every decision that you make, operational, functional, structural, creative, financial, put it through that lens. Is this in service of that feeling? And if it is, do it. And if it's not, don't. Because there are so many companies that think that brand is about product. It's not. They think that brand is about logo. It's not. Brand is about feeling. That's all it is. And if you can be open enough to the idea that the decisions that you're making in your company should all be in service of supporting and elevating that feeling in your customers, then you're going to win. And I'm going to go right back to the beginning of the question that you asked, because I'm answering in a very roundabout way. It is about feeling, but for a reason. The reason is to drive loyalty as far as possible, because what you get with that is you don't get lightweight relationships with your customers. You can withstand mistakes that you're going to make as a business operator. That's going to happen. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to fuck up somehow. Just going to happen. But if you're true to your brand and you respect your customers and the feeling that you evoke in them, you'll be able to get past that because they'll give you the time and space to be able to do it. It'll make it so much more efficient to make decisions. And at the end of the day, loyalty converts into revenue. It's just, you're going to make more money. You're going to have to spend less money marketing. It's going to be easier to talk about what you do. It's going to be easier to make a connection with people, because making emotional connections is much more important than making a rational connection. And from that, it's just better for your business. So I cannot stress enough the lesson of the Love Marks experience, the lesson of working with all those global Fortune 500s, all the lessons of everything that we've done actually over the past 10 or so years since we were kind of enlightened to that. They all organize around the principle that you have to build a brand, not just a product, no matter what kind of company you are. SaaS, hardware, just general services, restaurant. It doesn't really make a difference what it is that you do. If you're not focusing on creating an emotional, feelings-oriented connection with your customer, then it's going to be harder and harder to compete in a much more competitive environment. I just can't understand how a company can actually survive without really understanding what their brand is at this point.
Right. So it's sort of translating that, what you stand for, into the experience externally. Yes.
So I will actually share with you some experiences that we've had with that. So I will tell you that we are not an obvious product for our customers to use. It's not actually easy to describe what we do because there are so many factors, and because the AI that we built is so technically complex that it just, like, people's eyes would glaze over if I really tried to describe it. And I'll give you a very, very simple kind of example of what it is. But basically, we automate production experiences using AI. That's the basis of what we do. We have a dozen other features on both sides of that people are using us for, but that's the basics of it. It's like, if you could do it in radio, then we can do it in digital at scale. We can select voice tracks and layer them over content. We can segue songs together perfectly so there are no gaps of silence in between. We volume level, we crossfade in and out dynamically using AI. We can choose ads and interstitial content and all kinds of other things to kind of create these rich, multidimensional listening experiences that sound like somebody crafted it in a recording studio over an hour painstakingly connecting all the elements together so it sounds so perfectly produced, but it's AI doing it instantaneously. When we first went out to the market and we started to talk to our customers, or who we hoped would be our customers, we were so excited. We walked in like, oh my God, this is pathbreaking. Nobody's ever done it before, actually. Well, I didn't know that when we first started to build it, but we were like, oh shit, nobody ever did it before. It's like, we have to figure all of it out from scratch. And we made it work, which is kind of amazing because it was not likely in a way that something this complex and sophisticated would actually work and sound good. We went out to these big customers and started pitching them the technology. And every one of them was like, oh, that's really cool. And none of them bought.
Oh.
Because their whole thing is like, well, this is a feature, an amazing feature, but that's what it is. It's a feature, not a product. It's not a need that we have. It's just an awesome feature. Mm. And we were kind of left scratching our head. I mean, we're like, but it's so cool. Yeah. And to be fair, actually, everybody did agree that it was pretty cool. So at least that made us feel good, but feeling good doesn't pay the bills. So we over time started to, I guess you call it eat your own dog food is the term, right? We started to apply our own lessons, the recommendations we would give to other companies, the recommendations I'm giving to people right now. We started to apply that to ourselves, which is, you know what? We're not in there selling a feeling. We're not being true to our brand, which is that we want to transform the way that the world listens to music. We're in there pitching technology. Hmm. And so instead, we started to describe ourselves a little bit differently. We did basically lead by saying we want to transform the way that the world listens to music, right? We do that by using extremely powerful artificial intelligence to help bring these ideas to life. But the real point is that we want to elevate the way that it sounds for people. We want listeners that are happier. We want customers that are differentiated. We want to take all these really unique techniques that radio has done about storytelling and kind of emotional connection and infuse it, thread it into the tapestry of listening experiences that our customers offer as their product. And we want to help their initiatives, their dreams for what their music experiences could sound like to come true without them having to hire 500 people to do it. They can just use our AI to do it instead. That is a winning message. That is a story that today allows us to be the global leader in AI services for the music industry and to have customers, some of whom we've promoted before and announced, some of whom we can't even announce because they're so big they don't want us using their brand. We're powering a huge number of music listening experiences today, and our AI gets over 1 billion what are called API calls a month commercially to create experiences that listeners have. And we're just continuing to grow. And the reality is the pivot point for us was when we stopped talking about our product and we started talking about our values and our purpose. It converted it from something that was really cool but not meaningful to somebody to something extremely cool that they were willing to pay for and ready to sign a contract for. And I think that's just the proof of the experience for us. That's the proof that the brand message works, not just for your brand to a global consumer base, but from your brand to your customers, whoever they may be. And if you can get them to feel about you differently and understand what you stand for, you're much more likely to convert that into a long-lasting relationship. And so that's our experience with taking the brand lessons and applying them to something that really has nothing to do with brand, right? It's a very, very sophisticated set of technology tools. We just don't talk about it that way usually. We talk about it in terms of what our values are, and it seems to make more sense to people for some reason.
Yeah, I think one of the dangers when you are working with software is if you talk feature, it can get very transactional. And that's easy for people to say no to. But, as rational as we like to all think that we are, we're actually very emotional decision makers. And when we can tap into that loyalty, that larger message, and what we stand for, then people really get on board quickly, even if maybe the previous pitch wasn't as effective.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. I think it's human nature, I guess. I mean, most of this, maybe in some ways, a lot of this stuff is just a way of organizing very obvious principles of, how humans actually work sociologically. But it still works. It's still, this is still very powerful stuff. And it's something that I really hope that our customers continue to adapt to and adopt. So that's the first thing is we aren't just selling our brand. We're really, and we're not a brand agency, right? We're just not, but we still can't help ourselves. We want our customers to have a more powerful relationship with their customers, because it just means that their customers are going to be happier. They're going to listen for longer. Our customers are going to be able to stand apart in a crowded marketplace and carve out their own area to succeed. And it just kind of lifts all the rising tide lifting all boats thing. It's real. And it's something that we really, really strongly want to meaningfully contribute to as we work on this stuff. But additionally, the other thing is whoever's on this webinar, and anybody else for that matter, those are really powerful lessons to learn. And they're not our ideas. We're literally just regurgitating all kinds of stuff that we learned from others in the brand space that have spent a lifetime working to perfect their understanding of how this stuff works. We're basically taking the Kevin Roberts love mark concept and the Jimmy Omani, Saatchi and Saatchi purpose concept, which is, something that hundreds of companies have used to kind of define their values, and just using it for ourselves and trying to help our customers to use it for their listeners.
Can you talk about some brands that have done this well sonically who are maybe not in the music streaming space? I know you and I talked about like the American Airlines. You hear the music in the commercial, you hear it when you're boarding, it's in the, every stage of your experience on the website, etc.
Yeah, so I think there's something different between a sonic brand and a sonic logo.
Mm-hmm.
So sonic logo, for those that don't know, a sonic logo is a small, short mnemonic device that companies try to get you to connect to their brand when you hear it. So the most famous one is Intel Inside. Okay, so I don't even have to hum it, and I won't, because the likelihood is that everybody that's on this webinar can hear it in their own heads. That's an excellent example of when you hear those tones, they're talking about Intel chips. Yeah, American Airlines did a really good job of using a classical piece to I can't remember what it was, Rite of Spring or something like that, and kind of converting that into something that you hear no matter where the touch points are. So you hear it on their TV commercials, you hear it when you're on hold booking a reservation, you hear it in the airplane before they play their safety briefings. It's like you're on an American Airlines flight because they're using that really well. And there are companies that do sonic logos pretty well. The other side of it, though, is sonic branding, which is like what makes it different when you listen to something over long periods of time. And for companies that are audio companies, that's kind of harder. I would say broadcast radio companies do an excellent job of it. Right? Say what you will about the technology. When you're listening to a broadcast radio station, they care about every aspect of the moment. Right? For them, they need you to listen longer. The longer you listen for, the more likely it is you'll listen through advertisements, and that's how they make their money. They're a free service. They're just trying to get you to listen for as long as humanly possible. So you'll listen to those ads, and the way they get you to listen as long as humanly possible is by using techniques in between the songs to keep the energy going, because it is an absolutely proven, scientifically proven method for getting people to listen for longer. Maybe it's a big explosion sound between songs, or a station ID, or a DJ talking about something unique. It could be phone-ins from people who are like, hey, I'm Zach and I love your station. Would you please play this song? It could just be really well-produced elements. It could be artist interviews, or the classic thing you hear is, hey, this is so-and-so, and you're listening to whatever station it is. All of these things, you put it together, create a sonic brand experience. And many radio stations have similarities to each other, but also many are very different, creating something that's super unique, differentiated, and scientifically ends up, from an analytic standpoint, getting people to listen for longer. That's a great example. There are some other pretty cool examples, though, as well. So when you listen to NPR News, it's not music, but NPR News has a very particular style, if you think about it. The way that they have their presenters speak, the kind of softer, more personal experience that they try to present. The way the data is presented. So NPR is not a very editorialized news feed. It's kind of fact-based, and they work to stitch their facts into a storytelling device, right? That's how NPR kind of works. They don't really have crass commercials. NPR has promotions. This is, this NPR broadcast is brought to you by, some foundation or something that you'll frequently hear. That's a sonic brand. You know when you're listening to NPR that you're listening to NPR. And in fact, when you listen to a lot of podcasts, many of which have taken the NPR style for themselves, a lot of people who know NPR listen to that and say, that feels like NPR. And it may be one of the reasons why so many podcasts have actually done well, is that NPR is a beloved, respected brand. Whether you like, listening to that or not, you have to respect the fact that they've been able to carve something very unique out for themselves. And that's a brand that they've established. That brand feeling has infused itself into many podcasts that are out there today. And I think it's helped a lot of those podcasts to kind of gain some success and some loyalty, because they've kind of borrowed from what NPR has done really, really well. There's no end to the kinds of differentiation that you can create. It really just comes down to, are those mechanisms of differentiation true to your values? Do they resonate, right? Are they congruent with everything else that you're doing? And I'm going to circle all the way back to the Harley-Davidson example. The Harley-Davidson brand itself is loud, American, steel, iron, right? Shaky, roaring, muscular, outlaw. There's all these things you can kind of say if you're like, well, what are the attributes of Harley-Davidson? A light, well-handling, quiet, sophisticated, energy efficient, comfortable motorcycle experience does not connect very naturally to all those words that I just used. The product of a loud, nasty, boisterous, shaky, fun, ridiculous, over the top, maybe illegal motorcycle that's way heavier than it needs to be and just kind of badass, that connects with all those other attributes, the values that they have. When your product and your marketing and your values connect congruently, that's when your brand is working. When they don't, that's when you know that it's not. And so I would strongly suggest to anybody that's watching this, strongly suggest that you take time by yourself or with your team to try and isolate what is it that makes you different and what do you stand for? What are you willing to die on a hill for? What are you willing to make what other people call bad decisions for in order to uphold your values, in order to be true to them? And then how can you make sure that those values infuse themselves into all of your products so that when somebody's using it, it feels the way that everything else you're talking about feels. And then you've got a winner on your hands. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love that. I think people can really smell inauthenticity. Did I say that right? I mean, if you're trying to game the image with, sort of mixed messages and trying to be something that you're not, it just doesn't work. I think you're right. It has to be congruent in everything that you do, and it has to be, what you actually believe in. You can't really fake that.
So let me tell you why it is that we partnered with WellSaid. I am not a paid shill for this company. I want to be very clear about that. I'm sharing my perspective because I believe, I like the company and I believe in them very strongly. So I'm sharing this honestly from the heart and from the experiences that we've had with them. What I said earlier about storytelling, about emotional connections, is core to everything that we do at Super Hi-Fi. If we're not creating an emotional experience for consumers, then there's no reason for any of our customers to use us. They can just play playlists of content with gaps of dead silence in between, and people would be, I guess, reasonably happy. Super critical for us to live up to our values, that we're doing a good enough job for our customers, that the experience elevates, it becomes more emotional, more interesting, more of a storytelling experience that they're weaving themselves through, rather than these like discrete playlist experiences that we think are very kind of neutered in their emotional impact. In order to do that right, you have to have voices. The human voice is the best storytelling device that's ever been created for other humans. And we love stories. We're pre-wired as humans to be taken through narrative descriptions of things. We've used many, many, many voices in our service over the past 6 years of operations, DJ voices, tens of thousands of them. that we've had to record and that we've edited and mastered and written scripts out for and all this other stuff on behalf of our customers, so that when somebody listens to their music experiences, there's stuff woven in there. That's fantastic, but it does not scale. And as we're moving towards a world where music experiences are discrete and personalized, it just becomes harder and harder to have personalized DJ voices recorded to cover all eventualities, all possibilities, all music listening experiences. So we've needed to have access to some sort of synthetic voice technology in order to start to kind of to ladder up to the next level of what we know our service is going to be able to offer. There's been synthetic voice technology for as long as we've been in business. I mean, the reality is, you know, all the big tech companies have them, Amazon, Google, Microsoft. They are all designed to be fast. They are all designed to be phonetically perfect. They're designed to be maximally efficient, I imagine, from a computing standpoint, so they don't have to incur costs on the back end. What they're not designed to do is be believable or emotional. And for us, that's the only thing that matters. What WellSaid, and I'll be honest, I don't understand WellSaid's technology completely. What I understand is the quality of the experience that they deliver, and that's enough for me. But what it seems like WellSaid has done is said, no, that the only thing that seems to matter for voices is how humanistic and believable it actually is. And it seems like they went at it from the other direction, which is let's see how believable and emotional it can be, and then we'll figure out how to make it efficient on the other end. Rather than let's start from an engineering perspective and make it as efficient as possible, and then try and figure out how to make it believable at the other end. And that's super important to us because it means that we finally have access to on-demand, real-time voice creation that's almost indistinguishable from a human and allows us to start to power experiences that before this were never available to our customers. You just couldn't create one-to-one listening experiences with any scale because I'd have to hire hundreds or thousands of voice talent to create an endless array of available voice tracks that I could use in certain circumstances and try and figure out some matrix for how to select them based on their preference, what they like, what time of day it is, what weather it is outside, all these other things. It's not very realistic. Whereas with something like WellSaid, it's super easy for us to do that. And the experiences that we've been able to create using WellSaid voices in our demonstrations are mind-blowingly good. And they're mind-blowingly good because of so many different things. A, they're mind-blowingly realistic, which is the only thing that really matters. So a consumer's not sitting there listening to it being like, yeah, something's a little off on this. That doesn't happen. The other thing that's mind-blowing is that then for us, it allows us to finally start to bring to life the sound of what we think the future music listening experiences are actually going to be. And they're going to require this kind of synthetic voice to actually get there. And then the final thing is that, at least for me, and this goes back to the brand piece, is that as a company, we like working with companies that are true to their own values. WellSaid is certainly one of them, and we've been really fortunate to work with a number of others. That's the final thing that I'll just say in terms of brand and how to kind of how to work with other companies when you're looking to elevate your own brand. What I found, just to finish that thought, Caroline, and then we can go to Q&A if you want. What I found is that for us, when we work with other companies that are as true to their brand as we think we are to ours, it becomes like a force multiplier. Even if we overlap in certain areas of capability, it never feels competitive because our values are different, or not. Our values our reason for being is different. Our values are actually all the same, which is that we're looking to do an awesome job for people, and we really believe in creating change. But the purpose of our existence is different enough that it allows us to coexist and help each other out in the most beneficial of ways. And so it's just another reason why understanding your brand and being true to it and limiting your decisions to only those things that are in service of elevating your brand is just such an incredibly efficient way of growing and operating a company.
Yeah, I was going to thank you for doing my job of marketing WellSaid Labs for me. You did a great job. I really appreciated that testimonial there. While we get into the Q&A, before we get to that, first of all, I just wanted to give a shout out for your website if people want to learn more about Super Hi-Fi. And then we did promise these concrete steps. So go ahead and enter your questions in the chat area. And in the meantime, we're just going to quickly go through these sort of practical things that you can do to help identify what your differentiation might be. So Zach, do you want to just kind of run through these?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. I mean, here, I'm going to start by saying two things. First, buy the Love Marks book.
Okay.
Go on Amazon and buy it. There's no reason not to understand it before you start digging deeper. The second is, if you can find any information online about Saatchi & Saatchi's organizational purpose work. They did it with companies like Procter & Gamble and many others. It's really beneficial. It's a fantastic set of processes for figuring this out. But basically, there's 4 simple steps, I think. You can call it a branding audit. Again, we're not a branding agency, so that could take on many meanings. But basically, it just comes down to figuring out what makes you different and figuring out what you stand for. If you can isolate those things, you're 75% of the way there. And you're 90% of the way there in terms of figuring out a competitive advantage for you in the marketplace. A lot of companies aren't different from one another. They just try and copy each other, and they're so focused on their products that it's kind of hard to figure out what makes one product different from another. The companies that have their values and wear them right front and center, they're the ones that end up standing out in the marketplace and doing better competitively. And that's the second point, is just find those core values and the emotion that you think it evokes. What's the emotion that you think it evokes when people hear and feel it? I'll tell you what we work on. I'm not saying that we do the best job of it, but we try it, is we want to drive inspiration and a feeling of magic. The inspiration is about where we're trying to help our customers go with respect to their music experiences. And the technology itself, if they have the opportunity to play with it, that's where the magic is, because we've removed so many steps from the process that it just feels like things happen the way you're thinking about them rather than the way you're trying to do them. And that always evokes a really powerful feeling in people. So for us, it's like inspiration and magic. Everybody's going to have their own. You can figure that out. And then how does that establish itself? Like, what do you want people to feel after the fact? We put some words down here: confidence, simplicity, innovation, friendliness, trust, whatever. There's any number of things that it could be. And these are all positive words. As I mentioned before, Harley, so those words of feelings wouldn't necessarily be considered positive, or maybe they'd be considered a little aggressive. Let's put it that way. It doesn't have to necessarily be these like light, soft words. It could be whatever the hell you want it to be. That's your feeling you're trying to evoke in somebody. And then the final thing is, unless you're a brand genius, and there are people who are, I mean, Richard Branson certainly was one. It was just innate in him. Steve Jobs was absolutely one. I can tell you that I'm not. It's taken a long time for us to figure out how to establish our identity in general. And when it comes to the sonic identity that we're helping people to create, if that's something that you guys are interested in doing for whatever reason, it's going to take a while too. Because not only do you have to translate all of these values into actionable descriptions and decisions, but then you have to figure out how to actually make it sound like something. That's not easy. I will just share, we continue to this day to optimize over and over and over again to write this constant never-ending improvement that we apply to our own way of talking about ourselves, to try and figure out how we can do a more effective job of evoking a feeling by sharing the values that we have. And also tell you that for those that are on this webinar that are going to go try that, it's sometimes a little bit scary, because what you're actually doing is somebody asked what you do. Hey, what do? You want so badly to answer, oh, we have these technology tools that do this and this and that. It's very unnatural to say, what we do is work to transform the way the world listens to music. Let me explain what that means. Right? It's kind of like, oh God, it sounds like a tagline. But if you do it enough, you kind of understand, like, people don't hear it that way. They're like, oh, tell me more. What does that mean? And it's like, we're looking to elevate the experiences that people have when they listen to music today. Today, most of the music that they're listening to is a very generic experience. It's playlists with gaps in between. We're trying to bring that to life and activate the space between the songs so that customers are more delighted, they listen for longer, and that the value chain expands. That's our whole reason for being. Our reason for being is to transform the way that people listen to music. That makes a lot of sense. Now we could start talking about that. Well, how the hell do you do that? Well, that's a different story. We do it with extremely advanced technology. But it's weird when you first start talking about it that way. You're like, it sounds totally rehearsed and too hokey. But the proof for me is in the number of partners and customers that we have. We don't have those customers because we describe our technology in great detail. We have those customers because we share values with them, and they want that passion and purpose in their company. And then the technology is how we actually activate it.
I love that. Thank you so much. I think that these concrete steps really help people kind of translate, what someone like a super hi-fi does, but how can that work in any kind of a business? And it's really, like you said, coming down to that, what do you stand for? What are the emotions you're trying to evoke? And then executing that every interaction that you have with your audience as much as possible.
That's exactly right.
Great. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground. Let's see what our Q&A is. Again, if you want to see more about WellSaid Labs, we have our website here. I'll be sending out this replay tomorrow. You can always message me with feedback or future webinar ideas if anyone has something that relates to this that we should be covering. And I apologize if I lose my slide deck here. I couldn't quite tell. Let me get to our Q&A. All right, let's see what we have in here. We have some WellSaid feedback. I think we'll save that for the inside team. All good. Let's see. I wanted you to see if we could circle back just a little bit to when you were talking about like what you stand for. I feel like surely that's something that has been present since the founding. You can't just choose that later, right? It's got to be kind of in your DNA. Or have you seen companies that can kind of pivot with that? And
no, I think you're entirely right. I mean, you can certainly change what you stand for, but it's still got to be authentic. And usually what you stand for is driven by the people that started it, because it's their passion that kind of created the idea in the first place. We're running out of time, but I'll kind of share something I've been thinking about lately. Adam Newman, the founder of WeWork, he was pilloried for his excesses. Okay. One of the things that seems to be the most, that draws the most derision is that he came up with this tagline, elevating the world's consciousness. And when they were trying to go public and he was starting to get excoriated in the press, it was like the over syrupy, delusionally kind of large, thinking behind that was like ridiculous when you're talking about a shared office suite.
Yeah.
And I think it was Scott Galloway who kind of took him to task. I don't know if you read any of Scott Galloway's stuff in the tech press, but
yeah, and I watched We Crash too. So
he tore him apart. And I remember watching it while it happened, and it kind of made sense. You're like, yeah, it's so ridiculous, like elevating the world's consciousness. It's totally ludicrous. And if you did see We Crash, which is a really good show, you can even kind of get that it's just so over the top. But I was in a WeWork yesterday. We don't have offices anymore since the pandemic. And so we have a monthly subscription to WeWork around the world so that we can use conference rooms when we need to for team meetings. We do monthly ops meetings. We fly people in to meet with them. And we were in this WeWork yesterday. And we had all these really cool revelations about our business. You get on a whiteboard and you do 8 hours of ops meetings. Hopefully you'll have good revelations. And we were there, and there were a bunch of people that were, around us in other glass offices. And it's a little like a habit trail. And there's just like 1,000 people packed in this place. And it kind of looked around, and I saw everybody else kind of doing what they were doing. Some people were high-fiving, some people were on phone calls. A lot of people were doing Zooms or sitting at their computer working on stuff. I kind of realized that I stopped laughing at that statement that he used to make. I realized that the really incredible thing about the right kind of co-working experience is that you are surrounded by people who are having revelations all the time about what to do. If they're a big enough business, they're not going to be at WeWork, okay? So it's like,
Yeah.
you're not in a company like, Apple knows what they're doing. They've had all the revelations that they need. They're an exceptionally well-run company. They deserve every bit of the valuation that they have. They're incredible. The companies that are at WeWork are like me, right? They're figuring it out, right? They're hustling themselves to the next day, right? Trying to figure out, like, what did I do well today? What worked, what didn't work, et cetera. You have revelations all the time. In that kind of an atmosphere where you have theoretically 100 or 200 companies that are all experiencing those same things simultaneously, it kind of is really almost elevating the world's consciousness. And even though it's still cheesy to some degree, I kind of realized that maybe that's what that dude's whole mission and goal was in the first place. And maybe that's why actually WeWork was the best, whatever you think of co-working spaces, it really was the best co-working space that existed. They overspent on design. They did all these cool things. They made these great communal spaces. They had all kinds of social interaction stuff. It's still a co-working space. You can't get around the economics of it, but the experience of it was something that was certainly better than I had experienced in any other shared working space that I've visited in the past. That's somebody's true purpose coming out in their values. And then the product follows from there. And so I'm not saying this to excuse the syrupy nature of that description of purpose. But actually, it does kind of strike me that it might have actually been really authentic from the beginning. And that maybe even maybe it didn't feel weird for him to say it. Maybe it felt weird for people to hear it. But all the decisions that went into how that company grew kind of followed from that. And so I would just strongly suggest that, when you're looking for the values and the purpose of your company, the best way to do it is to look inside, because you're probably going to find that the company that you have follows your values. And if your values and purpose are one that you think connects other people to those values in a meaningful and emotional way, then you're probably going to have a successful company no matter what your product is. And I got to say, if you don't have values and you don't have a purpose that connects emotionally with people, then you're probably not, no matter what your product is. And I think in many cases, that's the difference between businesses that succeed and fail. It's not just how awesome the product is, it's how meaningful the emotional connection is that you're able to drive for your customers. And on that note, we've gone about to the top of the hour, and I have a hard stop. I hope this was interesting in some way. For you guys, enlightening maybe a little bit. If anybody has any direct questions for me, please feel free to reach out directly. My email is zack@superhifi.com. Just email me directly, or you can go through anybody at WellSaid. We communicate on a regular basis. And if you have a question for them, or if you're in WellSaid and you're one of the WellSaid employees and want more info, just feel free to reach out to me or directly to Caroline, and we'll address it directly.
Perfect. Thank you, Zach. I'm going to go order love marks.
Caroline, thank you guys very much for the opportunity to speak. This is really awesome.
Great. Have a good rest of your day, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.